Good morning. I think I need Dr. Lee to go before me every single time because I feel so relaxed now. All right, where's the clicker? All right, so today I'm Becky, and I am a teacher of the visually impaired. I am a teacher of the deafblind. I'm an orientation mobility specialist, and my real passion is CVI and helping families and students really discover how to use their vision in a way that's purposeful and meaningful. Oh, and this is a video I wanted to show you, but I don't know how to fast forward it to where I want. So I'm going to play just the first part and I'll tell you about the second part.
With CPI, every person's lived experience is different. These are their stories.
Can you say your name? My name is Grace. And my name is Country. Philadelphia, Ishikusa. My name is Molly Applefinger, and I'm here with my son, Levi. Hello, my name is Norman. I figured out that I was very fortunate what it actually feels like day to day. And that includes wanting to collect other CBI experiences and bring that forth as well, since everyone has a unique experience.
What do you know?
And so the person that was speaking last in the plaid shirt, they go on later in the video to say that CVI causes them to question every single thing about their day and about their life and how they can never really depend on what their vision is telling them. And so I find that so meaningful that if without given the appropriate tools, and sometimes with the appropriate tools, we still don't know what our brain, how our brain is interpreting the information that's given to us. So today I want to help us understand why do our kids get CVI? What causes that? I want to talk to you about the characteristics and phases of CVI and how each part of that has a different way for us to provide accommodations. And we saw in that video how there's a huge range, a huge gamut of kids with CVI, and some have CVI that impacts every second of their day, and some have CVI that is less noticeable, but still requires intensive interventions. I want to talk to you about how CVI is diagnosed and really how CVI impacts access to everything that has to do with our life. We might hear CVI called multiple things. Cortical visual impairment. It could be called cerebral visual impairment. All encompassing of that is neurological visual impairment. It all has to do with how our brain accepts the information from our ocular system, interprets that, and creates meaning and experiences. CVI occurs when there's damage to parts of the brain that process information. And we heard Dr. Saad talk yesterday about how the information is sent, right, to our occipital lobe, but then it's sent all throughout our brain, through our dorsal stream, through our ventral stream, and how any part of our brain that has experienced some type of trauma or damage may impact the brain's ability to process that information. And it's estimated that over 40% of our brain, and I think Dr. Sa yesterday said it was, I don't know, 70 or 80% of our brain that's devoted to vision and visual function and interpretation. And it's important to know that the eyes are the receptor of the information, right? The images are being taken in by our ocular system, but the brain is the one that interprets that information. Why do our kids have CVI? Oops. And it's all listed there for you. I don't need to read it. But really what's most important to us right now, right, is that genetic syndrome and how that impacts our kids with CVI. Every single time a child has had some type of neurological trauma, there's a chance that CVI is present. How do we diagnose CVI? I'm an educator. I don't get to diagnose CVI. We need a medical professional for that. But how we take the steps to get to CVI, how we take the steps to get to the diagnosis is important. We need to first know that the eye is healthy, that there is nothing wrong with our ocular system, that there's not a refractive error, that there's not cataracts, that that word will come back to me. All of those things work properly. We need to know that there's a history of neurological involvement. All those things that were just listed, those are the keys to another check, right? That helps us get to that diagnosis. I want to see if there are specific visual behaviors that are associated with CVI. Are all those things in place for us to take to the doctor? And I should reverse those because the educational assessment is very important. As Dr. Sa said yesterday, the clinical exam doesn't really measure CVI or the impact that CVI creates in our life. The medical diagnosis helps us to get those services, but the real intervention comes from that educational assessment. We need a teacher of the visually impaired who is skilled in the area of cortical visual impairment to do an assessment, to look for all of those behaviors, those visual behaviors that are associated with CVI. And from there, we take that information to our ophthalmologist or a neurologist or a neuro-ophthalmologist, and we say, we think we have CVI here. Can you help us get that diagnosis? And so these are the characteristics or the visual behaviors that we look for when we are doing that educational assessment. I look for color. Can my child look at a single color, or can they look at a variety of colors? Can they look at something that is multicolored or multi-patterned? Or when I show them that, do they look away? Do I need to move? Do I need to create some type of movement to get their attention or to sustain their attention? Or are they so distracted by movement that they can't look at anything else when somebody walks by or something is moving? Are they obligated to look at that movement? Latency. Latency is huge for our kids with CVI. And latency is the time between when I present something or when you present something and the time that they bring their visual attention to that object. Sometimes that latency can be 0. Sometimes that latency can be 40 seconds, which is huge. But if we don't honor that time that they need to bring their eyes around, then they're unable to visually attend or interpret. Does light help? Can I use light to get their attention, to keep their attention, to sustain their attention? How far away can they look? And when we have a healthy ocular system, we know what their clinical acuity is. But often, clinical acuity and functional acuity are 2 different things, because the farther something is away from me, the bigger the array, the more things that are in my sight. And so sometimes our kids need to bring it really close, even though their acuity is 20/20. Sometimes that object comes right to their face because now we're blocking everything else out. Can our children look at something that's new, or do they only like things that they're familiar with? We have complexity, 4 domains in complexity: the complexity of object, colors, patterns, the array, again, right, what this object is presented against. Is it presented against a simple black background, or am I looking at a whole entire room? Environment. When we think about environment, we think about noise, temperature, movement, all the things in the environment that can take our vision system away from the task that we're doing. It can also include biobehavioral states: hungry, tired, angry, just post-seizure. All of those things, all of those biobehavioral states can impact the way that our brain interprets information. And finally, faces. And faces, that's really a hard one for us as parents, because we want our kids to look at us. We want our kids to look us in the eye and look into our souls and know that we love them. Faces are so hard. We think about reflexes. Can my child respond to, can they blink when I touch them on their face? Or can they blink when something is coming quickly toward them? And finally is visually guided reach. Can they look for something? Can they keep their eyes on it? And can they get it? Or When something is here, do they look, turn their head, and reach for that object? Visually guided reach. And so the phases of CBI. When I do an assessment for a child with CBI or a suspected CBI, I use the CBI ranged assessment tool created by Dr. Christine Roman-Lancy. And she breaks her assessment down into phases, and it's scored from 0 to 10. Pop ahead. This is the range. So it's scored from 0 to 10, with 0 being really no functional vision or very limited functional vision, and 10 being near typical functional vision. We know in this first third, from 0 to 3, we're looking at just training our kids to provide visual attention. I want them to consistently and purposefully and intentionally look to the object that I'm providing to them. And that's visual. And lots of times in phase 1, our kids are using visual regard, and that's information here. They're not looking at it, they're looking away from it, they're using the side eye, the corner eye, their peripheral vision to look at their object. But when we use visual regard, we don't get detail. We get location, we get shape, we get color, but we don't get detail. And that falls in with complexity, right? The more complex something is, the less ability our kids have to look. Phase 2, we have a whole gamut. Phase 2 is the biggest chunk of our students. We're using some of that visual regard. We're starting to use visual attention. My eye is looking at this object. My eyes are on it. We all know that I am looking. That's visual attention. And then towards the top part of phase 2, about 6 or 7, we're starting to interpret. We are connecting meaning to the object that I'm looking at. My eyes are on it. I see it. I am connecting meaning to this thing, and I can use it functionally in a task. And then phase 3, we have visual interpretation. We are working to have visual interpretation across all settings and activities, in the cafeteria at school or at church, at home in my room. All of those places require visual interpretation, but the level of energy, the level of ability it takes, of neurological power it takes to do that in those different locations varies. And so we want to make sure that our kids have the tools to visually interpret across settings and activities. I think we all know this guy. And here he is. Ben is using visual regard. He's looking at his mom. He knows it's his mom. He loves his mom, and he wants to look at her. But right now, he's using that visual regard. He's so handsome. Visual attention. We have joint visual attention here. The dog and the child, they're looking at each other. Visual attention. We're going to skip to, we'll get to visual interpretation in a minute. So distance viewing, I talked earlier about distance viewing. We have in the first slide with the 2 people there, the adult and the student, this is our typical working distance. 14, 16, 18 inches. He's looking, he's reaching, he's doing all the things. But our student who's alone with the iPad, he has reduced working distance. And it's not because his acuity is low. It's because he needs to focus all of that attention on that one icon. And so when he gets that close, he sees less, and he only sees the one thing he's looking for. Light, right? I think we can all relate to this. Our kids love light, bubble tubes, iPads, TVs, screens, windows, ceiling fans with a light up toys that spin and provide movement. And lots of times I'll find my students laying in the spot of sun, push the cat out of the way, put themselves in that spot of sun. And this is another one of my fun friends. And we're gonna look at Elliot here using visual regard. You're gonna see him turn and use that side eye. He's gonna provide visual attention. And when you see him with visually guided reach, you're gonna see him sometimes maintain eye contact as he's reaching. But most of the time, Elliot kind of shifts his gaze away as he reaches. Bit sideways, sorry. It's not shocking him, I promise. Oh. And his mom isn't holding his head still. She's providing some support so he doesn't have to work so hard. He has some nice visual attention there. Initially, when he started playing there, he had his head turned away. But after a few seconds, he was able to incorporate vision and touch. Here we have Ben again, because he's the star of the show. We're going to see Ben use a lot of visual regard. At the end, we're going to see him have some visual attention. Visual regard, visual neglect, visual attention. And if he had a guitar, he'd be smashing it. Visual latency. This is my coworker, Jen, and Carlos. Carlos is deafblind, and so he has hearing levels that are profound, and he has CVI. And so Jen shows us impeccably how to honor his time for latency. She introduces herself through her tactile symbol. And she waits. And there she has it. And if I'm going to start, she starts singing, nobody wants to hear that. If she had interrupted his time for latency mid-cycle, he would have had to go back to zero and start that process again. So anytime we interrupt the need for latency, we're resetting the clock back to zero. And that seemed like an extraordinarily large amount of time to wait for Carlos, but it was only a few seconds. Again, here we have Ben. And this clip always intrigues me because it's his speech therapy. And he's supposed to be using his communication device to communicate that he wants more, but he never provides visual attention. It is a cause and effect for him. He knows if he touches it, the vacuum will be turned back on. And so he does look at it, but not in the way that she had intended. It's the funniest thing, isn't it, Ben? And so again, I know so many of us want our kids to use augmented communication devices. And for many of our students, many of our children, that is an appropriate device, but not until they're in the stage where they can begin to interpret two-dimensional information. And that is well past 5 on the CVI range. So anytime we have a communication device with images, especially the abstract board maker, the head that's shaped like an egg with a smile or a frown, that is so abstract. Anytime we're asking our kids to do that before they're ready to visually interpret, we're creating a system for them to fail. So we're going to see a series of videos of Ben that talk to us about complexity. Ben kills it in this video. He is at home. He is with his mom. At the time, this was his favorite toy in the world. He can do this toy at home. Visually guided reach is superb right there. And it continues. He reaches over, he picks up a toy, he puts it in. But now let's look at Ben with his favorite toy in a different situation. Here I have the complexity of array controlled. So there's a black background, there's black on the table. The only thing in his array is his toy. There is environmental complexity behind him. The child is the same, the toy is the same. The only thing that's changed is the environment. And now we have the same, it's the same day. Still Ben's favorite toy, but I have not controlled anything for complexity. You see that that table is crazy with toys. The noise is louder. It's a different environment. And Ben's frustration here is palpable, and it hurts my heart to know that I set that up for him. It helps to turn the toy on. And it's like he's never seen this toy before. He's so frustrated. And this demonstrates the importance of controlling for complexity. Okay, visual interpretation. When we are asking our children to interpret, to look at something and connect meaning to it, we have to set it up correctly. So this student, this was their object schedule. First, they were going to eat, then they were going to go to the bathroom. But our kids need to know, right, that this bowl means I'm going to eat, and this diaper means I'm going to get a change. And that happens through experience and intentional instruction. Visual interpretation. How do we know what this is? It's through experience, right? We go into an elevator. When we're little, we go into an elevator, our parents push some buttons and things happen. That's called incidental learning. Our kiddos with CVI don't have the luxury or the privilege of incidental learning. We have to teach every single thing that we want them to visually interpret. We have to tell them about this abstract symbol and how these things, when I see the triangles pointing together, the door is going to close. But when I see the triangles pointing away, it means the door is going to open. We have to be purposefully and intentionally teaching those types of things. All right, look at this mess. This is a mess of an image. But I bet all of us can find one piece of something in this image that helps us create a whole, right? So for the butterfly is super simple. We see those wings, we see the dots, we see the shape. We know that it's a butterfly, even though we don't have a whole picture. Again, our kids don't have that luxury. They don't have the ability to look at this and pull out pieces of information until we teach them how to do that. So if I said to you, find the eagle, where is the eagle in this picture? The first thing I think you're going to do is picture an eagle in your head. And then you're going to scan this image, and you're going to try and find the pieces of this image that match the image in your head. How did we get that image in our head? Through experience, through incidental learning, through intentional teaching. And once we teach that, it's easier to find. Right, so here's our bird, here's our eagle. Now that we know where it is, now that we know what it looks like, we can find it more easily in that mess. And we'll do it one more time, only this time I'm going to ask you to find the grasshopper. I think it's a grasshopper or praying mantis, something like that. I'm going to guess the first thing you do, put that image in your head and think about color, because it's a unique color. And then you're going to scan this image, and you're going to look for the piece of the grasshopper that matches the image in your head. And there he is. How do those images get in our head? Intentional, purposeful teaching. Questions? What kind of questions do we have?
Thank you, Becky. Questions? I've got one. Okay, so I'm by trade, a special education teacher. Let's say we're a family and they've come to you and they've got the educational assessment. Yes, on the CVI range or in phase, whatever, right? And so they go to their ophthalmologist, they get the diagnosis of CVI. If they're in a school district that does not have strong visual supports, maybe doesn't have a TVI on staff or doesn't even contract with one, like, what do you recommend those parents do to make sure that their kids are getting access to appropriate services?
That's a great question, and it happens a lot. So once our kids are diagnosed with CVI, they have the educational assessment that says, yes, their vision impacts their ability to access their environment, their curriculum, and the things around them. They're required by law to provide you with services. That's the first step, getting the TVI in there. And by law, once we show there's an impact, they're required to do that for you, for our kids. The second piece is getting somebody who's knowledgeable, because not all teachers of the visually impaired are knowledgeable in cortical visual impairment. And so then we have to start, if there is one TVI in the district and they are not aware, it is unfortunately the responsibility of the team then to help them find the tools that they need and find a mentor to help them expand their knowledge of CVI and how to impact. Each state, I think, has a school for the blind who should have people who are knowledgeable and who can mentor teachers along the way to help improve their skills.
Any other questions?
We're from Australia, so I know things can be a bit different here, but is there, in terms of therapy and things we can do at home, is there anything that we can try to do to help our children with play and just interpretation of their toys, just to make their life easier and less frustrated? Like, should we be using a black screen? What simple things can we do?
Sure. And so the first, if possible, right, you want an assessment to tell us where they are in that CVI range so that we know which tools to incorporate. But if we don't have that, if for some reason you don't have access to that in Australia, you can start with the greatest accommodation for CVI. And I have some papers that I can give you if you need them. So you start with the greatest level of accommodation, and then you slowly take them away until you find out where they start to fall apart. And we know when our kids fall apart, right? They're looking away, they're pushing it off their tray or their table. They are having a full-on CVI meltdown. We know when we've reached that point that we've pushed them too far visually. And that's where you know your intervention will begin. So if you see me, I'll make sure you get some forms.
Okay, so my daughter is not diagnosed with CVI. We'd never heard of it until SCN2A, and she's 26. But she's always had issues with depth perception in speech, when they would try to teach her to use their little talkers or whatever, she doesn't do well with 2 dimension. I've always wondered once I heard about CVI, if that's a possibility, but is 26 too late? I mean, she does a lot of what I saw in the videos where she's like this, she's like this. Anyway, it's just, that's why I'm in this talk, but I want to know is at 26, what do we do?
Right. So the assessment tool I use is normed until kids are 18. So that wouldn't be the appropriate tool, but it doesn't mean we can't assess, and it doesn't mean we can't provide interventions that help her to be able to attend or interpret. And so again, we just need to find out where her baseline is and provide supports right then and there so that can help her begin to understand what her ocular system is relaying to her brain. Yeah, it's never too late.
Now the one over here.
Okay, hello. Thank you for your lecture. I'm all the way from South Korea, and to be honest, CVI is not really well known in Korea. At my understanding, I think there is only one person who has studied a lot about CVI. So, I have a 15-month-old baby, and he is actually having a very slow development. So he is really like a neonatal still. So it's really hard to say. His eye contact is not good. I don't know if he really sees good or not. We did not have a like thorough any visual tests done yet, because we think we cannot do anything with him because he is so neonatal. He has no responses or anything. But I have once met the CBI expert, and I hear I hear she's saying like, I think he is on CVI, but I don't really believe in, like, because we don't see any responses. So like for this kind of neonatal child, what do you recommend for what can I do anything further? Should I still meet an ophthalmologist then for like testing, or what do you recommend for?
Right. So I always recommend an ocular exam, right? We want to know that the eyes are healthy. I don't know if you saw the presentation from the ophthalmologist yesterday, but he said we need to make sure those eyes are healthy to make sure the image that we're showing is clear, right? So that's your first step. From there, I would really encourage you to take your child into a room, turn off the lights, have no sound, everything is quiet, and then present them with a lighted object, a spinning object, a flashlight, a red pom-pom with a light shining on it, and see if you can get him to look from there. And then from there, we can begin to build out the way that we use light to support vision, and gradually begin to increase the complexity in the room. But it sounds like you really need no noise, no light, one lighted object, to start beginning the process of visual regard and visual attention. Yep, I'll follow your gut. If you believe he is seeing it, then parents know their kids better than anybody else in the world, right? So if you feel like he's using that visual regard, right, he's not going to, sorry, people, he's not going to use his eyes directly on that object yet. He is going to use this visual regard, that dorsal stream information. And so put it there and give him tons of latency, time for latency. And then when you think he sees it, give him time, right? Let him really look at it. And when he is finished looking, move it somewhere else and slightly shift it, right? To see if he'll kind of shift his body in space to look at it some more.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you for your talk. This is great. What's the connection between CVI and certain anti-seizure medications that SCN2A kids take? Our son, we believe he's been diagnosed with CVI, and but there's our ophthalmologist said, oh, there's a chance he could grow out of it. It could be the anti-seizure meds that are making him, or maybe heightening some of the how he shows CVI. So Do you know anything about the connection between, he takes, for example, vigabatrin, that's one of his anti-seizure meds. So what's the connection there between that?
Right, so we're gonna put medication into that biobehavioral state when we think about complexity. So anything that inhibits our brain's ability to visually attend or visually interpret an object or an image, that's gonna fall into that biobehavioral state. I would suggest that, and you may already do this, starting at the most extreme level of control of the environment, just like I was describing with the light and the controlled environment, and see if that helps to kind of improve his ability to visually attend. I know that there's a connection. I know that creates a reduction in that biobehavioral state, which creates a reduction in our ability to visually interpret. So when you find that you're in your child is experiencing this biobehavioral state due to medication, just layer on all the accommodations that you can to support that vision, so that when he is able to change medications or when he begins to, his body begins to absorb that and work through it, then we already have started to create these visual pathways and visual images right in our brain that we can pull out later. So yeah, don't stop, keep going, but know that you're going to have a lot of visual accommodations to support him.
Thank you. Any other questions? Last one that I have. So where do you recommend? I know that I think you maybe had a slide that had some resources. So if you have parents that have caregivers or home nurses or anything like that that interact with their kids maybe outside the school environment, what are some recommendations that you would give, either places for them to go or simple strategies at home that they can use to help provide their kids with the most visual support, even like at home or, with a nurse? Or I know you'd shown like a very simple like visual schedule up there earlier for eating and toiletry.
Right.
Like, is there a place where parents can go for resources for things like that so they can help educate those caregivers, grandparents, things like that for their kids?
For sure. And the first place I would start is your educational assessment. A good assessment for you will list multiple recommendations about how you can present things to support visual attention and visual interpretation. The Perkins School for the Blind has a massive amount of videos that addresses each phase of CVI. The Texas School for the Blind does as well. So their websites will help give you information to support your ability to help other people learn about it.